The word landed wrong the moment it left his mouth. It was not a shout. It was not even particularly loud. It was one word, spoken in the middle of a crowded boardroom on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Toronto, and it stopped every conversation in the room the way a dropped glass stops a dinner party. Victor Carter did not realize what he had said until he saw where everyone was looking. They were looking at Renata Holloway. Renata Holloway, who had just walked through the door. Renata Holloway, whose name appeared on the building's exterior signage in brushed steel letters 6 inches tall. Renata Holloway, who controlled roughly $2.3 billion in private equity, and who had not, as far as anyone in the room was aware, been expected to attend this particular quarterly review. Victor had been mid-sentence, addressing the room, meaning to say, "Ladies and gentlemen." What came out instead? Because he had been awake since 4 in the morning and had driven 3 hours from Sudbury, and had not eaten since a gas station coffee and a granola bar somewhere near Barrie, was something that sounded unmistakably like ladies and then for a half-second the wrong word. He said, "honey." It happened because his son Nathan had called him at 6:15 that morning, with a minor crisis involving a broken furnace, and Victor had been mentally drafting a response to that call while simultaneously pulling his notes together, and somewhere in the crossed wires of exhaustion and divided attention, the wrong word had surfaced and been spoken before he could catch it. The room did not move. Renata Holloway looked at him. She was 51 years old and dressed in a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, no jewelry except a thin watch on her left wrist, her dark hair cut close and practical. She had the kind of stillness that suggested she had heard everything there was to hear in a boardroom, and had not yet encountered a situation she could not manage. She looked at Victor for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, exactly. Something more precise than that. She said, "Go ahead," and that was the entire reaction. Victor Carter was 53 years old. He had worked in infrastructure finance for 26 years, first as an analyst, then as a project lead, now as a senior director at a mid-sized consultancy that had been retained by Holloway Capital to assess the viability of a Northern Ontario transit expansion. He had sat in hundreds of boardrooms. He had briefed ministers, negotiated with municipal councils, testified before regulatory bodies. He was not a man who lost composure easily. He finished his sentence. He moved through his presentation. His voice was level, but he was aware, with a precision that had nothing to do with professionalism, that Renata Holloway had taken a seat at the far end of the table and was watching him with an attention that was not quite the same as the attention of the other 12 people in the room. Afterward, when the meeting broke and the room filled with the sound of chairs and conversation and the particular low hum of people checking their phones, one of Victor's colleagues leaned over and said quietly, "Did you just call her honey?" Victor said, "No." His colleague looked at him. "I'm pretty sure you did. I misspoke. In the direction of honey. I was tired." His colleague picked up his portfolio and shook his head slowly, the way a person shakes their head when they have decided that something is funny but are polite enough not to laugh yet. "Good luck," he said, and walked toward the door. Victor began gathering his own materials. He worked methodically, the way he did most things. Cap on the pen, papers stacked by size, the small habits that kept him organized when other things were not, the transit corridor projection. He looked up. Renata Holloway was standing on the other side of the table. She had not, apparently, left with the others. Her hands were at her sides. She was holding nothing, which gave the impression that she had come over specifically to say this one thing and not to perform any other action while saying it. "The numbers you cited for the Parry Sound extension," she said. "The ridership estimate for year 5. Where did that come from?" Victor set down the papers he was holding. "Internal modeling. We cross-referenced 2 provincial datasets and adjusted for regional growth projections published in March." "Which March?" "This year." She was quiet for a moment. "Not uncertain," she was thinking. He could tell the difference. "Those projections were revised in April," she said. "The revised version came out on the 14th. Did you use the original or the revision?" He had used the original. He had not known about the April revision. He said, "The original." Renata Holloway nodded once. It was not an accusatory nod. It was the nod of someone filing information away. "It affects the year 5 number by about 8%, she said. "Not enough to change the recommendation, but you'll want to know before the municipal presentation." Then she picked up the folder that had apparently been on the table in front of her the entire time and walked toward the door. Victor said, "Thank you." She paused at the door, did not turn around. "April 14th, she said. Ontario Ministry of Transportation, it's publicly available." Then she was gone. Victor stood in the empty boardroom for a moment. The projector was still on, casting a blue rectangle onto the screen at the far end. Someone had left a coffee cup near the window. Side, 32 floors down, King Street was doing what King Street did at 11 in the morning. He pulled out his phone and searched for the April revision. She was right, 8%. He updated the figure in the document before he left the building. The second time Victor Carter saw Renata Holloway was 3 weeks later at a reception hosted by the Greater Toronto Infrastructure Council at a hotel on University Avenue. Victor had been invited because his firm had been listed as a sponsor, which meant in practice that he had been told to attend and stand near the firm's logo on the signage near the bar and be available to have conversations. He had been doing this for 20 minutes, holding a glass of sparkling water, when he became aware that someone had moved into the space beside him and was also looking at the logo. He looked over. Renata Holloway said, "Your firm spelled infrastructure wrong on the sign." Victor looked at the sign. She was correct. The second R was missing. "I didn't make the sign," he said. "I know." She took a small plate of something from a passing server without looking at the server. "How did the municipal presentation go?" "You heard about that?" I was briefed. "It went well. They had questions about the Year 5 ridership projection. Did you have the revised number?" "I did." She looked at him then, a direct, even look that did not contain anything particularly readable. "Good," she said, and moved the conversation somewhere else without seeming to move it at all. They talked for perhaps 20 minutes. Not about the project specifically, about the pattern of transit investment in mid-sized northern municipalities, about a similar corridor assessment she had funded in New Brunswick 4 years ago that had produced unexpected results, about the particular problem of applying urban ridership models to routes where the primary users were not commuters, but people with no other transportation option. She spoke precisely in the way of someone who had thought about these things for a long time and did not need to perform that thinking in front of an audience. Victor had opinions about most of what she said. He said them. She did not agree with everything. She said so specifically with evidence. He found this straightforward to engage with. At the end of the 20 minutes, she said, "The extension assessment. Have you done a scenario model for delayed implementation?" "Not yet. It's in scope for the next phase. It should be in the current phase." She set down her plate. "If the provincial funding announcement is delayed past Q1, the municipal contribution schedule doesn't hold. The whole financing structure shifts. You need to know what that looks like before you make a recommendation." She was right about this also. He had flagged it internally as a risk, but had not moved it to active modeling. "I'll build it out," he said. She nodded. "Send it to my office when it's done, not through the project manager. Directly." She handed him a card. It had her name on it and a direct email address and nothing else. Victor put it in his jacket pocket. "I'll have it by end of next week. Take the time you need. Do it right." She moved away into the rest of the reception. He watched her go for a moment, not because of anything in particular, but because she was the kind of person whose exit you noticed the same way you noticed her entrance. He finished his sparkling water and thought about the delayed implementation scenario for most of the drive home. The scenario model took him 9 days. He built it himself rather than delegating it, which was not standard practice but which felt necessary in this instance, because the shape of the problem was more complicated than he had initially understood. There were 4 distinct delay scenarios with materially different financing outcomes, and 2 of them required restructuring assumptions that went back to the original project terms. He sent the document to the email address on the card on a Tuesday at 7:43 in the morning. The response came at 8:02. Reviewed. "Can you meet Thursday at 2? He wrote back, "Yes." She wrote, 32nd floor, use the north elevator. He used the north elevator on Thursday at 1:58. And was shown into a corner office by an assistant named Lawrence who offered him coffee and then left quietly when Victor declined. Renata Holloway was at her desk. She was reading something and did not look up immediately. This did not feel dismissive. It felt like she was finishing a thought before beginning another one. Victor sat down in the chair across from her desk and waited. After a moment, she set the document down. "Scenario C," she said. "Walk me through your assumptions on the municipal revenue offset." He walked her through it. She had questions. Not clarifying questions. She had understood the model. She had questions that pushed against the model's edges, that tested whether the logic held under conditions he had not explicitly addressed. He answered where he could. Where he could not, he said so. At one point she stopped him and said, "You assumed a stable provincial cabinet for the duration of the delay. Why? Because a cabinet shuffle changes the funding priority entirely, and I didn't have a reliable way to probability weight that, so you excluded it. I noted it as an assumption." "Noted it in a footnote," she said. "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "That footnote could be the most important thing in this document." He thought about this. She was right again in the way she kept being right. Not triumphantly, not to demonstrate anything, but simply and accurately. "I'll build it out as a fifth scenario," he said. "Don't." She leaned back slightly. "Flag it to the municipal client as the scenario outside the model's scope. Give them the variables to watch. Let them decide how to weight it." He considered that. It was a better approach than building a fifth scenario based on assumptions he couldn't anchor. "All right," he said. "The financing structure in scenario A," she said, moving on. "The equity split. Your model assumes we stay at the standard participation rate. We won't." He looked at her. "What rate are you considering?" She named a number that was higher than he had expected. He thought about what that meant for the overall structure. "That changes the risk distribution considerably," he said. "I know. The municipal partners may push back. They will push back," she said. "I want to know what the structure looks like when they do, and what their leverage actually is." He nodded slowly. "That's a different model." "Yes." She looked at him. "How long?" "A week. Less if nothing else comes up." "A week is fine." She picked up the document again and turned to the last page. "One more thing. The corridor alignment in the secondary phase. Your report shows two options. North branch, south branch. Correct. Is there a third option?" He looked at her. "Not in the current analysis. There might be." She turned the document around on the desk and slid it toward him. She had drawn something in the margin, a faint line that took a different path between the two existing corridor options, hugging the topography rather than cutting through it. "I've seen something like this work in rougher terrain than what you're dealing with. It adds capital cost up front but reduces operating maintenance substantially. I don't know if the numbers work here. Find out." Victor looked at the drawing. It was done in pencil quickly, but it showed spatial reasoning that took him a moment to fully parse. The line made sense. He was not certain why he hadn't considered it, except that the two existing options had been in the original scope document, and he had worked within them without questioning whether the scope was complete. "I'll look at it," he said. "Good." She pulled the document back. "I'll need the revised model by the 14th. The financing committee meets on the 16th. You'll have it by the 12th. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. It was not the look she had given him in the boardroom after the wrong word. This was something different. Assessing, maybe, or recalibrating. He wasn't entirely sure. "Why the 12th?" she said. "I said the 14th, because if something needs adjustment, you'll have 2 days to tell me before the committee." The corner of her mouth moved again. The same small, precise movement as before. "12th is fine," she said. He stood, gathered his copy of the model, and buttoned his jacket. He was almost at the door when she said, "Mr. Carter." He stopped. "The word in the boardroom," she said, 3 weeks ago. He turned around. "I misspoke." "I know." She had picked up the document again and was already looking at the next page. "I just wanted you to know it didn't affect my reading of the work." He stood there for a moment. "Thank you," he said. She did not look up. "The 12th, she said. He left. The third scenario took 12 days, not 7. This was because the alternative corridor alignment turned out to be genuinely worth pursuing. The maintenance cost reduction over a 20-year operating horizon was significant enough to change the capital argument, and Victor found himself rebuilding a substantial portion of the model to account for it. He called his daughter Iris one evening during this period, not to talk about the project, but because she had left 2 messages he hadn't returned, and she answered on the second ring. "You're working on something," she said. Not a question. "Corridor modeling. Is it interesting?" He thought about it. "More than I expected. Is that because of the corridor or because of the client?" He was quiet for a moment. Iris had always been perceptive in a way that occasionally caught him off guard, even now that she was 30 and a licensed civil engineer in her own right. "The client is thorough," he said. Iris said, "That's not a word, Iris. It's a sound," she said. "It means I heard you." He did not pursue this. They talked about her work for a while. She was doing site assessment for a new water treatment facility outside of Hamilton, and about their plan to drive up to Muskoka in August to close up the family cottage for the season, a task that had fallen to the 2 of them since his mother had stopped making the drive. The conversation moved easily, the way conversations did with Iris, because she asked questions about the things she wanted to know and did not ask about the things she had decided were his business. Before they hung up, she said, "When you're done with the project, come for dinner. I'll make the lamb thing." "The lamb thing with the fennel? That's the only lamb thing." "All right." He sent the completed model to Renata Holloway on the morning of the 12th. All 4 scenarios the cabinet shuffle risk framed as a client-side monitoring variable rather than a modeled outcome, the revised equity participation structure with a sensitivity table, and the full analysis of the alternative corridor alignment with a clear recommendation that it be moved to active consideration. He also included a note at the end of the executive summary, 1 paragraph. It said that the alternative corridor had not appeared in the original scope, and that its inclusion reflected information provided during the client review process, and that the analysis was accordingly more thorough than it would otherwise have been. He sent it at 8:17 in the morning and did not look at his inbox again until noon. There was one message. It had arrived at 9:04. "The corridor analysis is the strongest section. The committee will want to discuss. Can you attend the 16th? Starts at 9. He wrote back, "Yes." She wrote North Elevator. The financing committee met in a room 1 floor above Renata Holloway's office, a room that was slightly smaller than the one where Victor had first misspoken and substantially quieter. There were 8 people around the table. Victor knew 2 of them. He was introduced to the others by a man named Graham Ashford, who was Holloway Capital's chief investment officer, and who shook hands with the efficiency of someone who had shaken a great many hands and saw no reason to perform any of them. Renata Holloway was already seated when Victor arrived. She did not acknowledge his entrance, which he understood to mean they were beginning. He presented the model. The committee asked questions. They were good questions for the most part, questions that showed they had read the material, or at least the summaries, and that they had specific concerns rather than general skepticism. The equity structure prompted the most discussion. 2 of the committee members pushed back, as Renata had predicted. Victor had the leverage analysis ready and walked them through it. At one point, a woman named Sandra Osi, who had been introduced as the fund's risk director, said, "The alternative corridor. Whose idea was that?" Victor said, "It came out of the client review." Sandra Osi looked briefly at Renata Holloway. Renata Holloway said nothing. "It's a significant departure from the original scope," Sandra Osi said. "It is," Victor said. "The cost of it over the operating horizon justifies the departure. You're confident in the maintenance projections." "I used 3 comparable projects in Ontario and 2 in Quebec. The range is in the appendix. I took the conservative end of the range for the model." Sandra Osi wrote something down. "All right." The meeting ran 2 hours. By the end of it, the committee had agreed to proceed with the revised equity structure and to formally add the alternative corridor to the assessment scope for the secondary phase. Victor was asked to present the secondary phase proposal within 60 days. He said he could do that. Afterward, in the hallway outside the meeting room, Graham Ashford shook his hand again and said that the work had been solid and that the committee appreciated the transparency about scope changes. Then he moved away toward another conversation. Victor was waiting for the elevator when he heard footsteps behind him. Renata Holloway stopped beside him. They stood for a moment looking at the elevator doors. "The committee approved the corridor," she said. "I heard it was the right call, including it." He glanced at her. "It was your call. You drew the line." "I drew a line in a margin," she said. "You built the case." The elevator arrived. They stepped in. The doors closed. She pressed her floor and he pressed the lobby. "The secondary phase," she said. 60 days. I'll need the original site data for the alternative alignment. Your engineering team has it. I'll have it sent to you this week." "That works." She was looking at the elevator doors. He was looking at the elevator doors. After a moment, she said, "You came from Sudbury originally." He looked at her. "My family is there. I live in Toronto. The commute to the northern site visits. You're doing them yourself. Yes, you don't have to." "I know." A brief silence. The elevator moved without any particular hurry. "Why?" she said. He considered this because the terrain matters. You can't read grade changes off a map reliably. And I don't like presenting recommendations about places I haven't stood in. She was quiet for a moment. "The New Brunswick project," she said. "I told you about it at the reception. The one with the unexpected results. I remember. I drove the corridor myself before we commissioned the assessment. 12 hours. My CFO thought I was wasting time. Were you?" No elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. They stepped out into the marble foyer, and the noise of the building, low, steady, the hum of a place where a great deal of money moved quietly, surrounded them. Renata Holloway paused. There's a site review scheduled for the Perry Sound section. 3rd week of July. Will you be available? Yes, I may attend. He looked at her. Is that a problem? She said. No, he said. It's useful to have the client on site. She held his gaze for a moment. Not quite the same as the look in the meeting room. Something slightly less formal, though not less careful. 3rd week of July, she said. I'll have Lawrence send the details. Then she turned and walked back toward the elevators. The other bank, the ones that went up, not down. Victor walked out through the revolving door into the June afternoon. The street was loud after the quiet of the building. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not quite ready to move, watching the traffic on University Avenue negotiate itself, with the usual Toronto patience and occasional impatience. His phone buzzed. A message from Iris. Dinner Sunday? The lammed back. Sunday works. He put the phone in his pocket and walked toward the parking structure where he'd left his car. His mind was already on the secondary phase, the terrain questions, the site data, the 60-day timeline, what the alternative corridor looked like on the ground versus what it had looked like as a pencil line in the margin of a document. He thought about Renata Holloway driving 12 hours along a corridor in New Brunswick that her CFO thought wasn't worth her time. He thought about standing in a field in Perry Sound in July, showing her what the grade looked like where the alignment changed. He did not think about any of this with any particular alarm. He thought about it the way he thought about problems that were worth his attention. He got in the car and drove north out of the city toward the next thing that needed to be done.